Hi, Todd VanDenburg here with VanDenburg Capital Management and another Uncommon Sense update. So since I last spoke to you, we had a bad month in April. The markets sort of took back some of the gains from January through March. But here we are about 3/4 of the way through May, and we've really regained back, all of those April losses and then some, and we're now sitting at new highs again in the markets. So I guess the short story here is uh, don't get swayed by your emotions. Don't get worried because the markets are down for a couple of days or a few weeks or a month or two. You really got to take that step back and be logical and rational about your investment decisions. And as I've been telling people, for a while, is if you follow the data and your data is sound, in the long run, you're more likely than not to end up in a good place. But that's not what I wanted to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is the concept of analyst expectations or expert expectations, as we see reported in the media on almost a daily basis. I'll give you one example. There's some recent data out about S&P 500 earnings, and as earnings have come in, we're almost completely done with first quarter earnings. We've gotten over 95% of the earnings in, and about 78% of the companies that had reported earnings beat analysts' expectations. So don't we have to ask ourselves, who are these analysts and how are they coming up with their expectations if 78% of the time they got it wrong? I mean, can you imagine that? And this happens with the Bureau of Labor Statistics all the time, where the Bureau of Labor Statistics will say, we think there's going to be 100,000 new jobs created this month. And then the actual data comes in and it's 275,000. They miss it by 100% all the time. Now, could you imagine what that would be like if, Columbus, when he was sailing, from Europe to come to find, the new world, if he missed it by 100%? I mean, that basically would mean he'd be sailing back towards Europe, but you sort of get my point, is these experts that are coming up with these expectations. There's another word for expectations in this context, and it's called a guess. It might be an educated guess, but we got to be super careful to not take actions based upon their, even if it's an educated guess. What we prefer to do is, instead of taking their version of how they interpret data, I actually go to the source and grab all the data myself, and then look at the data and not try to predict the future, reading tea leaves, using a Ouija board, but just say, okay, what's the trend here? Are there any correlations between new housing starts and unemployment, or the GDP, or interest rates, or what? Right? You're looking at source data to come up with your own idea for where things are and where things might be going. Because right now, as we enter the election season, I just think that we're going to hear a lot of people, as always happens during election season, a lot of people are going to be talking about things to try to influence us for how we vote. And typically the best way to do that is to scare you. So they're going to scare you about where things are headed, where things, try to manipulate you into thinking that things like inflation hasn't been up over 20% in the last 3 years. Oh, don't trust your lying eyes, right? So we just got to be careful to, if we're ever wondering where things are, I guess the best thing that you can do is just walk around your local community. Don't listen to people who tell you what they think, and just watch what people do. Watch what you actually see. And as I look around the US economy right now, Yeah, I see employment is not as good as it could be, but it's not horrific. There's still tons of unfilled jobs all over the country. When I look at US GDP, it's not as much as we would like, but it's still continuing to grow at an amazing rate. Yeah, people will continue to try to scare you about, the impending inflation, and I even talked about it 6 or 8 months ago, and it never materialized because of the strength of the U.S. economy. So I guess the point of today's update is just to try to start you down the road of thinking a little differently when the quote experts start talking about what they expect. Because literally, back in the 90s, there was some laws passed that restrict the experts' ability to get access to data that you and I don't have access to. In short, it's basically against the law for these analysts to get data that's not publicly available. And and so they don't have any magic wand or crystal ball. They're just using their best guess. And in a lot of cases, they're not really paying attention to what's actually happening, on the street in our local communities. And and sometimes their guesses are based upon what they would like to see or how they would like things to be. And that's just not a good way for us to invest. So again, heading up into an election cycle, there's going to be a lot of people trying to, convince us of one thing or another, also known as manipulation. Uh, and we just have to be careful to not be swayed by it. Things are rarely as bad as people try to make it out to be, or as good as people try to make it out to be. And so we just got to take all this stuff with a grain of salt. And if we're ever, feel like somebody's giving us information that's got a little bit of a slant to it, then we got to go back and look at source data, or look at the information that they might have used to come up with their conclusion, because we might look at that information and come up with a completely different conclusion. So long and short is I don't expect anything major from an economic standpoint to be changing here in the coming weeks, even coming months. Again, the as you run up to an election, people tend to not try to make big moves, because depending on how the election turns out, people may need to change directions again. So as different people are in power, they have different priorities, and therefore publicly traded companies will want to potentially do different things depending on who wins. So I don't expect any major changes to be coming here in the next 6 months, but I'm going to continue to watch anyway, because that's what I do. It's what I like. If anybody has any questions about anything as far as where the markets might be going, the economy, both locally and abroad, just give me a call, shoot me a message. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have. But spring has sprung. We're getting ready to head into summer. I hope everybody has a great summer, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next Uncommon Sense update. Thanks for watching.
If you'd like to be the first to hear of more Uncommon Sense updates like these, please click the subscribe button below. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks again.